I just returned last week from Alaska, where I was doing a television show, which is going to go on the air this coming spring. And I'm still a little stunned by Alaska. It's totally different from the way I thought it would be, and it's wilder, more fascinating, more intriguing. I didn't have much of a desire really to visit Alaska until I got up there, and I realized this is something else, man, something else. And there's no real way that you can say much about Alaska without going into superlatives and then sounding a little silly, and it doesn't sound realistic. But just about, let me see, it seems like now about 4 or 5 days ago, I was in Nome. Now, Nome, if you get out a map, the thing to do to really enjoy this show, if you're curious about the world that you live in, get out a map or a globe or something and look at Alaska. Get Alaska, because you know this is a very deceptive state. For one thing, it's far more west than you think it is. You tend to think of Alaska as directly north of, say, California. You think of that coastline is straight up, but it isn't. In fact, Nome, if you were to go directly south of Nome, you would be pretty close to the Hawaiian Islands. So it extends way out into the Pacific. And tonight's show is about Nome. I was in Nome just a few days ago, and Nome is way out in the far northwestern corner of Alaska. It's very close to Siberia. As a matter of fact, the Russian influence is very strong up there, but you can almost feel the alien quality of the land. It has very little to do with the continental United States that we know, and it lays on this sea. It's a tiny town, and I won't say any more about it than that. But just about a week ago, I did something. I made a tape. Wherever I go on my trips, I carry a tape recorder and actually do shows on the run. It's in a sense, it's radio verite. And it's found radio. And I want you to turn up your radio now at this minute, this instant. If you want to hear an exotic sound, turn your radio up and listen very carefully to this sound. And this is a tape that I made in Nome. I will be back as soon as you hear this segment of tape to explain the next one. So turn your radio up now, this instant. Many of you have ever heard. In fact, it's a sound that I know not many of you have ever heard, and I'm going to just sit here for a couple of seconds and let it kind of play around with your imagination a little bit. This is the old sourdough here, and we're up in Alaska, and I just want you to hear this sound. Sound of the slow rolling waves. It's a very odd-looking body of water. The slow rolling waves of the Bering Sea. There's another wave just lashed in. Lashed. They don't really lash here. This is a very flat, peaceful-looking sea, and it is lying under a milky sky. The sky is very strange up here in the far north, at least to people who are used to the more temperate latitudes. It has an odd, white, milky, misty flavor to it, extremely poetic and peaceful. And the sun is hanging right overhead almost directly overhead. The days are very, very long at this time of the year here. And I'm sitting on a rock about 40 or 50 feet from the shore of the Bering Sea. and possibly 100 yards or so behind my back is the main street of Nome. Nome is not at all the way I thought it was going to be. I don't know. It's very hard, to know what you think of a place. After you get there, it's hard to remember what you used to think of it. But Nome is nothing like the way I thought it was. It's a true frontier town. It's very different from most of the other places that I visited in Alaska. We've been in Juneau, and yesterday, spent the day in Kotzebue, which is an Eskimo village on the Arctic Ocean, about 30 or 40 miles inside the Arctic Circle. And there's hardly any way for me to describe what that experience was like. It's not the way you think it would be. I had no idea what an Eskimo village was like, except the usual cliches that people carry in their mind. And I can assure you it's nothing like that. It's a lot of little shacks, sort of ramshackle-looking little tar paper shacks sitting right on the edge of the Arctic Ocean, which just stretches out forever from their town. And if you have a map of Alaska, you'll find Kotzebue, which is way up north and right on the Arctic Ocean. It's inside the Arctic Circle. And as we flew towards Kotzebue, we took the plane from Juneau and stopped at Cordova and a couple of cities on the way up. You just had this feeling that the further you were going, you were leaving behind everything that had been, everything that's part of your life. I must say that the flight between Juneau, especially from Cordova on up to Kotzebue, was one of the most beautiful airplane flights I've ever taken in my life. It's fantastic scenery, enormous mountain range. The Alaskan range just runs straight up. And, of course, the Alaskan range is dominated by Mount McKinley. We flew past Mount McKinley, and it's the highest point on the continent. There's no way to describe McKinley. It's a very masterful mountain. and by the way, one of the most dangerous mountains in the world. It is considered by some mountain climbers to be even more dangerous than Mount Everest in some ways. But as we flew over, it was covered with snow, and you could see rivers and long-lying flat areas of plain and glacier. There's a tremendous glacier just outside of Cordova. And this is just a settlement, actually, just sitting there. And we flew on past this area and further on up north. If you ever get a chance to spend 2 weeks in your life that you just absolutely will not forget, you just got to see Alaska. You really have to. There's a tremendous peace up here too. Strangely enough, this is something I didn't expect when I came up here. I kind of felt that a lot of things that I felt that I'd see, I did see. There's a vitality, and it's a very masculine country. The first thing you feel up here is a kind of virility in the air, and it's a solid country. I haven't felt anybody up here yet that's been uptight in any way. I'm sure there are those who are, but there's a big election going on here, so everywhere you see people with buttons, and Egan for this, and so for that. And here in Nome, though, there are not many Eskimos in Nome. It's all pretty much an Eskimo population. And the Eskimos are they're extremely affable people. They have apparently an inbuilt sense of humor. and you get the sense that the Eskimos are always vaguely laughing at everything in the world. And I felt that really in Kotzebue, which, by the way, among other things, Kotzebue is a tiny town. It's about 2,000 people, and it's all fishing. These people live by fishing, and it's a little eerie to see on the shore of an ocean. This is the Arctic Ocean, a dead seal that somebody has cut some blubber off of. The seal is just lying there. course, this is summertime here, a very brief period, and in a few weeks, just a couple of weeks actually, winter will start settling in, and already they're preparing for winter. And I happened to be there when they just brought in a tremendous catch of salmon. The natives fish out of what looks like a long wooden skiff. It's just really a dory, kind of a primitive dory with a big outboard motor on the back, and they go out and they catch these salmon, this big Arctic salmon, in nets. And all the salmon are sent to Japan, which kind of surprised me. The salmon is not shipped back to the States, but they sell their salmon to Japan, and they make an enormous amount of money during the fishing season. In fact, I heard one report that it's not unusual for a fisherman to make as high as $1,000 a day when the salmon are out there. And they were really racking it in yesterday. A tremendous catch of salmon all spread out on the beach, and beautiful fish. I had never really looked at a salmon until I got up here, and I'll tell you, the salmon, the fresh salmon that are pulled out of the Arctic Sea and out of the rivers in this area are just a magnificent fish. These were big fish. These were, they ran maybe between 25 and 35, 40 pounds. Some of them smaller than that, maybe 10 pounds, but beautiful fish. And they have a jade mine there. There's a big deposit of jade up here. And there's a little store where you can buy jade things like paperweights and so forth. But jade is beautiful, and it's up here. It's part of their culture here. And of course, native carving is another big thing. And I thought one of the oddest things about Kotzebue was that every day or two during this short summer, an Alaskan Airways plane arrives. Jet plane. They have a strip runway here. And any of you guys that are flyers who are listening to me tonight, you haven't seen flying, really, until you've seen flying here in Alaska. Flying is as casual and at the same time is as in some ways very dangerous, because they have unexpected storms and thunder showers and so forth in many areas, especially around Juneau. But flying is an integral part of everybody's life. In fact, this morning I was listening to the Nome radio, and the guy's talking away there. The radio up here is extremely informal. It's like the focal point of the whole community, and everybody listens to the radio up here. And the announcer, the guy who was on the air, he said, well, it's time for the daily flight log. And let's see, this morning at 8:22 from the airport, they're taking a 180, Cessna 180. They're flying it up to Ugiak Point. Any of you people have to get up to Ugiak or send any supplies up there, the plane leaves at 8:55. It's the Cessna 180. Let's see, we have a Beaver float plane leaving at 10:03. And they're going up to Squaniuk Lake, and they're going up to the Oceanic region. And if you have any supplies going up there, there's a little space. You can ride up there with them this morning. And for 15 minutes, I was listening to the flight log of what was going in and out of the airport, and then he concluded it with an FAA flight weather forecast, including VFR readings and the whole bit. And the aircraft stuff that you hear on the air up here is as casual and as important to the people as the traffic reports are in New York City. They have no traffic reports here. Fred Feldman would be out of a job here in Alaska. But the aviation forecast is something else. It's a big thing. In case you just tuned in, that rolling sound you hear in the background is the sound of waves. It's a gentle, very gentle sea. Waves rolling in from the Bering Sea. This is the sound of the Bering Sea, and I'm not very far from Russia right now. If you have if you have a globe or a world map, you can see that Nome is one of the spots that's very close to Russia. In fact, when we were flying into Nome yesterday, the pilot, we're flying from the Eskimo village, Kotzebue, which is about 300 miles from here, beyond the Arctic Circle. He said that we're going to drop down below the cloud layer, and he said we can see the Russian coast from here. And of course, we were flying over the coast of Alaska at the time. He said you can see the Russian coast from here. And he said there's a Russian fighter base that's right in that area that he said probably are watching us on the radar right now. And you get a sense up here, of course, the real presence of Russia everywhere you go. That you see old remnants of the Russian architecture. Hotels are named after Russians. In fact, the Baranov Hotel in Juneau is named after a Russian that was apparently the governor in that area during the days when Russia owned Alaska. There's still a lot of evidences of it up here, and there's in fact a lot of feeding. In fact, a kid, an Alaskan kid said to me yesterday, who looked exactly like a typical 16-year-old kid from White Plains High School. He was talking about Russia, and he said, you know, up here in a lot of these places up here, he said, they don't think of Russia as any kind of an enemy. It's like the old country. And it's quite true. I'm going to try to describe what it looks like here, sitting here on the Bering Sea. I'm sitting on some rocks. There's a great pile of rocks just goes right down to the sea here. There's no beach here at all. It's just shallow water with the water rolling. You don't swim in the Bering Sea unless you're out of your bird. It's extremely cold water, of course. And there's a lot of whales that lie offshore here. Time to time they report a killer whale here. And it's not uncommon to sit in a hotel, which is directly back of me. There's a sea view room, which is a little tiny room of the hotel. And you can sit and enjoy your reindeer stay, because I did last night, and just look out over the Bering Sea. It's very different. It doesn't look anything at all like the Atlantic. It's a kind of a milky, gray, slate-colored sea. The horizon is very indistinct because the sky is almost the same color as the sea here in the north. The sky is kind of a bluish slate color, and it's an immense sky. Very few clouds in the sky, and those that are in the air are extremely low-lying. I'm looking out now at the horizon, and I can see way off, maybe 40, 50, 100 miles off, I can see a low-lying bank of clouds. And I'm looking directly north now, and they're right on the horizon. And above the clouds, you can just see the clouds are just laying right on the horizon. And above the clouds is an absolutely cloudless sky that stretches endlessly on over my head. And it's a kind of a milky color. And back of me is Nome. Nome has about 2,000 people. And it is right out of an old Western movie. You get the sense that any minute now Gary Cooper is going to come striding down the street with a pair of 6 guns on his hip. And all kinds of vehicles. The main street is not paved, although they're preparing to do it. They claim that they're going to have the street paved here before the winter sets in. And there's a lot of controversy in town about that. A lot of people say that Maine is going to lose its flavor when the main street is paved. Right now it's just gravel. And they have just paved the sidewalks. And there's 2 schools of thought up here. One school of thought is that Nome has lost a lot of its flavor. On the other side, there's the group of people who say, at long last, we're not going to have pneumonia because their feet are wet up here all the time. So you always have that battle between the people who want to improve life and those who want to maintain the old ways. And it's actually happening up here. The traffic is extremely casual here. A Jeep will ride down the street, or an International Harvester Scout. A couple of Rovers will go past, and a battered old Ford. I was looking at a Jeep here, parked in front of the hotel. It was just covered with mud. And the guy had sealed the doors up around the top. It was one of these convertible Jeeps with Willie's Jeep, with a convertible top. The only convertible I've seen in this country. And he had a great big spare gas tank strapped down to the hood. It was a really rugged, masculine-looking vehicle. It had four-wheel drive, tremendous mud tires on it, and he'd just driven in from the bush, and he had the outside of the doors. Apparently, of course, here it's very cool all the time. The wind was blowing in around his doors, where the door fitted on the canvas top, and he had sealed that with strips of wolf skin, just wolf skin, the fur sticking out. And I thought what a fantastic moment it would be if some guy drove that into, let's say, the food fair in Bloomfield, New Jersey. That could probably throw a scare into them that they wouldn't forget for a long time. But this is rugged, masculine country, and you see the vehicles reflected. And by the way, speaking of vehicles, this is WOR, New York, and I'll be back in just a few seconds. But before I drop off for commercials, I want to say one more thing. If you're just tuned in, I'm sitting on the shore of the Bering Sea. Hear that wave roll in? And it's a flat sea. It looks a little bit like, in fact, it reminds me more than anything, it reminds me of one of the Great Lakes. It reminds me of Lake Michigan. And I tasted the Arctic Ocean yesterday, and it's surprisingly unsalty. It's not very saline. Very cold and not very saline, and in fact, is not too impalatable. But what I was going to say about vehicles up here, in the Eskimo village in Kotzebue, they probably have got the only junkyard in the world that's devoted entirely to snowmobiles. You just see wrecked snowmobiles all over the littoral up there. Just every place you look, you see a wrecked snowmobile, and in fact, they just sort of are laying around the streets. And you'll see a wrecked outboard motor, or you'll see a wrecked motorcycle, and among other things, there's a wrecked airplane just laying there. And the people wander in and out among it, and you see the racks of seal meat hanging, drying in the sun. And so if any of you guys are snowmobile cuckoos, up here the snowmobile is not a romantic vehicle. It's just as utilitarian as a can opener. You just see wrecked snowmobiles everywhere. Well, we'll be back in a couple of minutes after these commercials, and the temperature right now is about 50 degrees, if you're curious what it's like. And I can see, now there it is, I can see rolling out about 200 yards out from me, I can see a herd of seals just rolling in the water, just directly opposite me here about, maybe 200-300 yards out. And the fishermen around here hate seals. In fact, there's a bounty on seals in certain areas up here because of the tremendous damage they do to the nets.
I think traveling is great when you're there, but the great thing about traveling is to look back on it and think about it, and look at all the things, and just think about it. It kind of marinates in your skull. Like, for example, I didn't really appreciate India until a couple of weeks after I came back, and all the stuff that had happened to me in India and the things that I had seen in India and smelled and felt in India began to have meaning. It kind of, in other words, the reason that people write history, I think, is because history tends to, at the time, it tends to be formless and just so, there it is. You're living through it, and it doesn't have any meaning. Now, have you noticed how neat the Civil War is now? Oh, you can get 50 different books on the Civil War, and every little bit of strategy is all lined out, and it's all neat. It's in a package. It's tied up. and there's the Civil War. You could just reach up on a shelf and pull down 3 books, and you got the Civil War in your hand, And that probably would have amazed some guy who was in the 4th Virginia Rifles at, let's say, Manassas. Which was just a great, fantastic, vast, totally formless mess. A lot of guys milling around, and so now today it's real neat. It is. Like our time, which seems to be totally confusing to almost anybody. I don't care who you are, Our time, right now, 1970, seems to be a total formless, chaotic, anarchic mess. And I suspect that, by the year 2100, let's even earlier than that, 2050, They'll have neat little books. I mean, it'll be so neat. And all the good guys will be neatly identified, and all the bad guys will be also neatly identified, and all the big boo-boos will be neatly dissected. And the people will feel quite smug about it, of course. They'll look back on our time. I'll guarantee you, they'll look back on our time. And they'll say, well, the people of that time had it really lucky because things were so simple then. How many times have you heard that said about, say, World War II? I mean, really, people say, there's a tendency for you all the time to believe that your time is the most confusing time of all. At the time you're living in, it's not only confusing, it's fraught with. And you add whatever you figure it's fraught with. But at any given time, I suspect that the people living in that time, we're going through it, it seems totally impenetrable and completely impervious to reason. It's only later that all the reason seems so neat. And so it's like any guy that's ever been in the Army. He knows this thing. That, guys will come right up to you, and whatever war you've been in, going all the way back to the Boer War, I presume, whatever war you've been in, there's some lout will come up to you and say, well, of course, me being drafted is a lot different than when you were drafted because it's a lot tougher now. You knew what it was about, and that you had. Oh yeah, sure. And it's going to surprise a lot of people to suddenly have this said to them about, say, Vietnam. It will. 50 years from now, some guy's going to talk to a Vietnam veteran and say, you guys had it lucky, at least, you knew where you stood. That had some, and it's always this way. And it hit me about Alaska, I was sitting there thinking about Alaska, sort of marinating. Alaska is a country. Now, for those of you who don't know why I'm saying this, a few weeks ago, I was in Alaska, and we were shooting a television show there, which is going to go on this April, actually. The series starts in April, and it's in color, and we've been doing a lot of very wild, fascinating work all over Alaska. And at the time, traveling all through Alaska, and seeing this fantastic scenery. And I might say this, that I've traveled pretty much in the world, as you know, Tony, in the past 7, 8, 9 years, ranging all the way from the Far East to Middle Europa. And I honestly can say that I have not seen a place that is more physically beautiful than Alaska. Now that, you're going to get a lot of arguments on that because a lot of people are going to, they're going to talk about Switzerland, or they're going to talk about the French Riviera, or they're going to talk about, those places are all beautiful, there's no question about it. But they're tame. It's the difference between looking at a beautiful horse that's in the center ring, we'll say, at Madison Square Garden in the Nationals, and looking at a wild horse somewhere in the Rockies. It's a very different beauty. And Alaska is so beautiful and so wild and so exciting that there's no place anywhere in the world that I've ever been that has that same feeling about it. Now, I've learned a long time ago that one of the important parts of any trip, to me, in fact, even more so than photographs, a lot of people take photographs wherever they go. To me, sound is more important. And I take pictures too, sure, but the sound of places really gets me. And whenever I want to feel a place again, I take out tapes I made in Bangalore, and I can hear the sound of that market. You can almost smell it coming out. And wherever I go, I take a little tape recorder and I tape sounds. And I just thought I'd play something for you that says so much about Alaska. It says more than any photograph will ever say, actually. And it was recorded, I was sitting in Nome. Nome happens to be one of the great favorite cities. It isn't a city in our term. When you think of a city, you think of a city. New York, Chicago, Pittsburgh, even a place like Bloomfield Hills is a fantastic city compared to Nome. Nome is 2,000 souls on the Bering Sea, right on the edge of the sea there, and behind them there's nothing but this tundra. They're beyond the timberline. There's no trees in Nome. There's only this low, barren, rolling hills of tundra, and it's peculiarly beautiful. The sun up there looks like no sun I've ever seen. The Arctic sun Robert Service described that sun, and you can't really say anything about it until you see it. It's a strange, eerie, lonely, watery, peculiar sun that doesn't give much warmth, not the way we're used to sun. And so I was there in the middle of their summertime, and everybody walks around wearing parkas, and it's quite chilly by our standards. In fact, the temperature every night would drop down to around 40, 45, maybe even lower than that, 37, 38. And this is the midsummer temperature. It's the middle of August. That's their big summer, which is about 9 days long. And and I remember walking along the Bering Sea and going into, there were 2 bars right on the main street. Actually, about 9 bars, but there were 2 bars that everybody went to on the main street of Nome, which is just one street, really, and a couple of little side streets running off of it, and this little Eskimo settlement there, and a few stores, and that's Nome. That's it. There's nothing else there. And they have a movie house, a little tiny movie house, and these people live all year there. And it's not a tourist place in any sense of the word. And I walked into the Board of Trade bar. It's a great name for a bar. And it's just a long, narrow bar. Do you remember when you were a kid, when you'd go into pool rooms? You remember how dark they were? There's a masculine atmosphere in there that you could cut with a knife. You just can't mistake. And you can smell stale beer, and it's dark, and you see 2 or 3 huddled figures at the bar, and a bartender walking back and forth with a blue work shirt on, and a big bar rag that's been used for 6 months, and he's walking around. This is the Board of Trade bar. Now, you know why they called it the Board of Trade? Back in the early days, during the gold rush around 1900 and before, that a lot of deals were made in that bar. It's the same bar, the same place has been running all the time. Hardly anything changes in the Arctic. The Arctic is like the jungle. You may stick a radar set up there someplace up in the boondocks, way up on a hill, which incidentally you could see, looking out of Nome, you could see a radar, a big round radar dome sticking up into the Arctic sun. And this was part of the dew line, but that's out of town. You could see it way down there. And it's so temporary. You looked at these radar things, and they have you know what they look like from a distance? Driving through the tundra, sitting up there on that low hill, looking out over towards Russia, which is very close to Nome. Russia's maybe 100 miles, less than that airline, across the Bering Sea there. And I had a feeling of looking, it was a very strange feeling. I had a feeling of looking at Stonehenge. It looked like Stonehenge, these great slabs of parabolic reflectors, but they were covered, they're a new type that look like a great slab of Stonehenge just standing there. And they're a dark brown, a kind of shabooey, earth-colored brown, and they sort of meld in with the tundra. And it looked like Stonehenge, these huge tablets standing there. And I was even reminded of the opening sequences of 2001, A Space Odyssey. But these were huge, just standing there quietly. You didn't see a soul moving around them. I'm sure that, had you gone up there, if you could got close to this place, there have been a lot of GIs in there working it. But there it stood. And down on a long slope going down to the sea, just all by itself, was this little strip of civilization called Nome. And I keep thinking about it. A curious place. It keeps coming back at you. And I went into the Board of Trade bar, and I had my tape recorder, and I'm sitting there, and I didn't carry it. Nobody was performing. I carried it in a pocket of my parka. I had a big parka with fur and all, and it was a nylon parka. They all wear nylon parkas up there, in case you're curious. They don't wear the old-fashioned fur parka that you see, the fur all over. They do occasionally, but those are for dress, believe it or not. And the working parka is a nylon parka, which is fur-lined. And it has a parka hood, which flops back, or if you pull it up, and the hood has a ruff around it of wolf fur. Now, the reason this wolf fur is used is because wolf fur has a property in it that moisture doesn't freeze on it. Did you know that, Tony? That's why the Eskimos all have these big ruffs of fur. So when you breathe on them, your breath does not adhere to it, and it's waterproof fur, in other words, and nothing will freeze on it. So I'm sitting in this joint there having a glass of Coors beer, which, by the way, is the big beer up there. It's brewed in Denver, and it all comes up there. They all dig Coors beer. So I'm sitting and drinking Coors, and in the darkness, and I see up at the bar a notorious Eskimo up there named Eddie the Rat. That's all I call him, Eddie the Rat, an old gnarled Eskimo. And he's sitting at the bar, and he's singing. He's been drinking. Of course, he's one of the town drunks, of which there are an infinite number. And he's quietly singing away, and I just turned on the tape recorder, and this is Eddie. You hear Eddie talking away in the bar there. See, and you'll hear me say a few words. You're singing? That's the sound of the Board of Trade bar on the main street of Nome, Alaska. A truck goes by. They have these big GI-type trucks, with huge cleated rubber tires in the back. Here, ready?
That's Good Friday. That's right. March 24th.
Yep, that's right. Eddie has a tendency to pinch ladies. He just did. I'm sitting here in the Board of Trade bar, which is on the main street of Nome, Alaska.
Nobody knows I'm not quite right.
I'll sell my shoes for a bottle.
I can't stop loving you, but that I couldn't quite make my mind.
Can't stop loving you, but
I could make you. That's why they call me Eddie the Rat.
Eddie the Rat. The next day, I went into another bar there, which is run by a lady, and a tall, angular lady, and I got talking to her about it. I says, I recorded Eddie the Rat. She says, Eddie the Rat? You recorded him? What do you mean? I said, well, I did, and I played this for her, and she was astounded. She said, I've known Eddie the Rat for 20 years. I never knew he could play the piano. This is the first time he ever did it. He just walked in, and everybody knows everybody up there. Speaking of Nome, speaking of Nome, I got a letter from a guy here, and, a lot of people who've heard me talk about Nome, one of the most interesting guys I met in Nome was Albro B. Gregory, who is the publisher and he's not really, I don't think he's a publisher. He's the editor-in-chief and the chief writer of the Nome Nugget. And it's a two-people paper. His wife Adelaide and Albro produced the paper, and it's read by everybody in Nome, absolutely everybody. And it really reads like Nome itself. Oh, you don't worry about that. You don't need that if you can't find it. And Albro, when I blew into town, he was the one guy that I met, and he hung around with us ever since we got there. And he's a giant bearded character. He looks like Hemingway in a way. He looks like a cross between Hemingway and Jackie Gleason. A little touch of sinister humor in him. And he produces the Nome Nugget, which is one of the greatest papers I've ever read. I really dig reading it. Every week it comes, I read the damn thing. And you get a taste of the real frontier. And I just got a letter from Albro, and I'd like to read part of it. He says, what a great letter that was. I've written him a letter. He says, what a great letter. He said, we really dug having all of you up here. I wish you could have been around longer. I'm looking forward to seeing Gene's Greenwich Village news. You see, he appointed me the official Nome Nugget Greenwich Village correspondent. So I'm keeping him informed of what's happening down on Bleecker Street and 10th and all that. He says, I'm sure that it's going to be great. He says, we have had over 100 subscriptions of new people who have heard you and, are enjoying the show, enjoying the paper. He says, wonderful. We appreciate this. Now, here's what he actually gets down to what's happening in Nome. Now, he wrote this a month ago, and it just got here. It took a couple of weeks to get, I don't know how he sent it, but it took a couple of weeks to get here. And he said, we've had lovely weather. Now, this was the 11th of September. For the last 3 weeks or so, nippy at night, the temperature dropping to about 20 degrees. I spent the weekend of Labor Day at Council City, which is at mile 74 from Nome. Now, everything in Nome it's not the same as it is here. You get in your car and you drive to Trenton or something. But up there, everything has numbers related to the city. So you say to a guy, well, I was up at mile 15. Well, that means that you were 15 miles out of Nome on that one highway that goes. There's only one highway. So he knows exactly where you were. And different places will have those names. For example, you go to the mile 8 bridge or the mile 15 camp. So he was up at mile 74, which is Council City. Council City, by the way, is 3 guys sitting around in a sod hut. And He said, I had a wonderful time fishing, exploring, and so on. And that's one thing about the people who live up in Alaska. They never tire of digging their land. You'd think that, a guy'd be up there for a while. He wouldn't go fishing or he wouldn't go exploring and that. Albro has lived in Nome all of his life, and he's a man well up there. He's got a big gray beard, and this is all he does. He loves it.
Just about 75 feet in that direction is the Arctic Ocean. I am standing right now at this minute knee-deep in tundra. I will spell that for you. Tundra. Tundra. Oh, listen, there is no more exciting word in the human language. Tundra. Jack London. Robert Service. Permafrost. Right under my feet, like 6 inches under my feet, is the biggest deep freeze in creation. You could put your Colonel Sanders chicken there and freeze it for all eternity. And not spend a nickel. Listen to that silence. You're looking at a man at a frozen north. A man who has left it all behind him. Do you realize that I am right now, at this minute, the northernmost human being on the North American continent? Between me and the North Pole is nothing except frozen tundra, polar bears, drifting ice floes, and silence. That way, fist fights, wars, the New York Mets, commercials for Right Guard. Yep, I've made my choice. I can feel the itch of the tundra under my feet. I am going. I am leaving all of it. I am going into the untrammeled wildernesses that lie between me and the North Pole. Goodbye forever. By the way, send my dogs after me and send plenty of Alpo with them. The tundra. Blueberries growing. Ptarmigans flying overhead. I'll see you guys. Say hello to the gang at Charlie Brown's for me and have a martini for me. Shepard is off. Forever. There's nothing out there except wilderness. So long. Tundra. Hey, there's a beer can here.